There are names written in the oldest texts that were never meant to be spoken aloud. Behemoth is one of those names, not a myth, not a legend. A creature so vast that God himself exiled it to the edge of the world to prevent the earth from collapsing. And it is waking up. The book of Job describes it. Enoch names its location. The Talmud reveals its purpose. For 6,000 years, this titan has slept beneath Antarctica, encased in ice, mistaken for mountains. Its bones are bars of iron. Its tail moves like a cedar. No weapon can pierce it. Behemoth was created on the 5th day, separated from Leviathan and preserved for one purpose: the final battle. This is not speculation. This is scripture hidden in plain sight. Every earthquake in the southern hemisphere, every crack in the ice, they are symptoms. The Titan is stirring. The masculine principle of the earth is preparing to rise. And when it does, the foundations will tremble. Subscribe now and remain until the end. What you are about to see will challenge everything you knew about creation and prophecy. Behemoth is not coming. Behemoth is already here. The ice is melting. The countdown has begun, and the world is not ready. In the beginning, when the foundations of the world were still soft and the waters had no name, God spoke into the 5th day of creation. From the depths of the primordial ocean, 2 colossal beings emerged, twins born from the same divine command, yet destined never to dwell together. Leviathan and Behemoth, their bodies were so vast, so incomprehensibly massive, that the young ocean could not contain them both. Every movement sent tidal waves crashing against the unformed shores. Every breath displaced volumes of water that could drown entire kingdoms yet to exist. The Creator saw what mortal eyes would never witness, the catastrophic potential of their union. If both remained in the waters, their thrashing would unleash the flood millennia before its appointed time. The carefully orchestrated timeline of humanity's rise and fall would collapse before the first man drew breath. And so, with the authority that separated light from darkness, God issued the decree of exile. The separation was not a punishment, but a necessity, a cosmic quarantine to preserve the fragile balance of a world still being sculpted. Leviathan was cast down into the abyssal trenches, into waters so deep that sunlight has never pierced them. There, in the crushing darkness beneath the ocean floor, the serpent coiled itself around the pillars of the deep, waiting. But Behemoth's sentence was different. He was driven from the waters onto dry land, not the fertile valleys or green pastures that would one day nourish humanity, but to a place beyond the edge of the known world. A desert without name, a prison without bars, the only living creature capable of surviving in absolute desolation. The ancient texts call this forced exile the separation of the brothers. It was the first division in creation motivated not by sin, but by sheer magnitude. Leviathan became the lord of chaos beneath the waves. Behemoth became the silent king of the forsaken earth. Both were immortal. Both were indestructible. And both knew even then that their separation would not last forever. One day, when the appointed hour arrived, they would meet again, not as brothers, but as combatants in the final war. The Book of Enoch preserves the memory of this moment with chilling clarity. On that day, 2 monsters shall be separated. A female monster named Leviathan, to dwell in the abysses of the ocean, and a male monster named Behemoth, who occupies with his breast a waste wilderness named Dwidana. The scholars who translated these words debated their meaning for centuries. Was this mythology, allegory, or a historical record of something that truly walked the earth when the world was young? What they failed to understand is that Behemoth was never meant to be studied. He was meant to be feared. His exile was an act of mercy, not toward him, but toward us. The wilderness of Dwidana was chosen because no human city would ever rise there. No army would ever march across its frozen wastes. No explorer would ever return from its depths to tell the tale. It was a geography designed by God himself to keep humanity and the Titan forever apart. Until now. Until the age when men would become so arrogant, so technologically advanced, that they would pierce the ice of the uttermost south and disturb what was never meant to be awakened. The separation that held for 6,000 years is ending, and Behemoth, the first exile, is beginning to stir beneath the frozen mountains of the world's edge. The Brotherhood is about to be restored, in blood, in fire, and in the final collapse of the earth as we know it. When God confronted Job in the whirlwind, he did not speak of angels or heavens. He spoke of Behemoth. Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee. The phrasing is deliberate. God created this creature on the same day he formed mankind, as if to remind Job that both were shaped by the same hands, yet one was given dominion and the other was given invincibility. The Titan was not an accident of evolution or a random mutation in the fossil record. He was engineered, crafted with intention, a masterpiece of biological architecture that no human mind could replicate or comprehend. The Book of Job describes his frame with language reserved only for structures built to endure eternity. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. This is not poetic exaggeration. Ancient Hebrew scholars who analyzed these verses understood that God was speaking literally. Behemoth's skeletal system is composed of a substance harder than any metal known to man. Modern metallurgy has produced alloys capable of withstanding immense pressure, but even our strongest materials fracture under sustained force. Behemoth's bones do not fracture, they do not bend. They are tubes of bronze, cast in the furnace of creation itself, hollow yet unbreakable, designed to support a body whose weight would collapse mountains. His musculature defies every law of biology we have established. Tissue density in terrestrial mammals is limited by oxygen supply and gravitational stress. An elephant, the largest land animal today, already operates at the maximum threshold of what muscle and bone can sustain. Behemoth is not bound by these constraints. His flesh is compressed to such a degree that it has the texture of stone, yet it moves. Each muscle fiber is wound so tightly that when he shifts his weight, the ground beneath him groans. When he breathes, the air pressure around him changes, pulling wind into his lungs with the force of a hurricane, drawing inward. His hide is impenetrable. The text does not say it is thick or tough. It says that swords and spears are counted as straw against him. Throughout human history, warriors have tested their weapons against the great beasts of the earth. Mammoths, bears, lions, whales. Every creature, no matter how large, has a weak point, a place where the blade can pierce, a gap in the armor. Behemoth has none. Arrows shatter on impact, bullets flatten and fall. Even modern explosives that can level buildings would do nothing more than irritate him, like gnats biting at a fortress wall. He's not merely resistant to human weaponry, he is immune to it. The designers of ancient siege engines understood leverage and force. They built battering rams capable of breaking through stone walls, catapults that could hurl boulders across battlefields. Yet the same engineers who studied war machines for decades would look upon Behemoth and despair. There is no siege tactic for a creature whose ribs are compared to bars of iron. His ribcage is not a protective shell, it is a vault. Inside that chest beats a heart the size of a throne room, pumping blood through veins as wide as rivers. His lungs expand and contract with the rhythm of tectonic shifts, drawing in enough air to fill caverns. What makes Behemoth truly terrifying is not his size, but his construction. God did not create him to be hunted or tamed. He created him to be untouchable, unreachable, a living reminder that there are forces in this world that exist beyond human authority. When men see a lion, they build cages. When they see an elephant, they forge chains. But when they see Behemoth, if they ever truly see him, they will realize that no cage exists large enough, no chain exists strong enough, and no weapon exists deadly enough to bring him down. He is the apex of God's creative power made flesh, a biological impossibility walking the earth as proof that the Creator does not answer to the laws of nature. He wrote them, and he can break them. Behemoth is the proof, the titan whose anatomy was forged not for survival, but for eternity. A creature so perfectly constructed that even death itself cannot claim him until the appointed hour. The only hand that can touch him is the hand that made him. And that hand, when it finally reaches for him again, will not do so to destroy him, but to unleash him. For centuries, theologians and naturalists attempted to domesticate the mystery of Behemoth by identifying him with creatures they understood. The hippopotamus became the favored candidate, a large, aggressive herbivore that dwells near water, matches the general description of bulk and power. Others suggested the elephant, citing its massive legs and plant-based diet. But these interpretations collapse under the weight of a single verse, a detail so specific that it shatters every comfortable theory men have constructed to explain away the inexplicable. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The comparison is not to a twig, not to a branch, not even to a young sapling, a cedar of Lebanon. These were the ancient giants of the forest, trees so enormous that King Solomon imported them to build the temple of God. Their trunks measured 15 feet in diameter. Their height reached over 100 feet into the sky. When the wind moved through a cedar forest, the sound was like distant thunder. When a cedar fell, the earth shook. And God, speaking from the whirlwind, tells Job that Behemoth's tail moves with the same massive, deliberate, earth-shaking force. A hippopotamus has a tail the size of a human thumb. It is a short, thin appendage used to scatter dung, comical in its function and utterly insignificant in scale. An elephant's tail, while longer, is still a slender rope of muscle and hair, useful for swatting flies, but incapable of bearing weight or exerting destructive force. Neither animal possesses anything remotely resembling the trunk of a cedar tree. The description is not symbolic, it is anatomical. God is providing Job with a measurement, a frame of reference that would have been immediately understood by anyone who had ever stood beneath the shadow of a Lebanese cedar and felt the awe of its magnitude. Only one category of creature in the history of this planet possessed a tail of such dimensions: the sauropods, the long-necked titans of the Mesozoic era, whose tails stretched 40, 50, even 60 feet in length. These were not decorative appendages. They were weapons. Paleontologists studying fossilized skeletons have concluded that certain species could crack their tails like whips, generating sonic booms that would disorient predators. Others used their tails as counterbalances, allowing them to rear up on their hind legs and bring their full weight crashing down on threats. The tail was not a weakness, it was an extension of their power, a limb as vital as their legs, capable of leveling forests with a single sweep. Behemoth's tail does not simply resemble a cedar, it moves like one. The verb used in the original Hebrew implies deliberate motion, controlled strength. When a cedar sways, it does not bend easily. It resists the wind until the force becomes overwhelming, and then it moves with slow, inexorable momentum. Behemoth's tail operates the same way. It is not a rapid, thrashing weapon. It is a siege engine made of flesh and bone, swinging through the air with the weight of a collapsing tower. Anything caught in its arc is not struck. It is obliterated. Trees are uprooted, boulders are pulverized. The ground itself splits open beneath the impact. This single detail dismantles every attempt to reduce Behemoth to a known animal. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The creature described in Job is not a hippopotamus or an elephant or any living species catalogued by modern zoology. It is something else, something larger, something that belongs to an earlier age, when the earth was young and the boundaries between the mythical and the biological had not yet been drawn. The tale of cedar is not a metaphor, it is a measurement of a reality we are not prepared to accept. The implications are staggering. If Behemoth possesses a tail of such scale, then his body must be proportionally immense. A sauropod, measuring 70 feet in length, would require legs like pillars and a torso the size of a warehouse just to support its own weight. Behemoth is described as larger still. His footsteps would leave craters. His shadow would swallow entire villages. When he walks, the earth does not merely tremble, it reorganizes itself around his passage, as if the crust itself must yield to accommodate his presence. And this is the creature that God exiled to the wilderness of Dwidana, not because it was evil, but because it was too vast to coexist with humanity. The tail that moves like a cedar was never meant to sweep through cities or crush armies. It was meant to remain in the waste places, far from the lands where men would build their kingdoms. But now, as the ice begins to melt and the ancient boundaries dissolve, the question is no longer whether Behemoth exists. The question is what will happen when that tail begins to move again, and the cedars of the earth are revealed to be saplings in comparison. The Book of Enoch does not speak in riddles when it names the prison of Behemoth. It provides a location with the precision of a geographic coordinate, a place name preserved across millennia in texts hidden from the common canon. A waste wilderness named Dwidana, on the east side of the garden where the elect and righteous dwell. This is not allegory. This is cartography written by prophets who saw beyond the veil of the physical world. Dwidana is real. It exists. And it has remained undisturbed since the days when the sons of God walked among men and the boundaries of creation were still fresh, east of Eden. The phrase itself carries weight beyond its geography. When Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise, they were driven eastward into a land of thorns and labor. East became the direction of exile, of separation from the presence of God. It is no coincidence that Behemoth was placed in the same direction, further still, beyond the reach of those who were already banished. If Eden was the center of divine blessing, then Dwidana is its opposite pole, a region so remote, so inhospitable, that even the exiled could not survive there. Only the Titan could endure it. The text describes Dwidana as a waste wilderness, but the original Aramaic implies more than barrenness. It suggests a place actively hostile to life, a geography where the normal rules of habitation do not apply. No water flows there, yet it is not a desert of sand. No vegetation grows, yet it is not a plain of ash. It is a void within the world, a pocket of non-existence where the earth refused to finish forming. Ancient maps left it blank. Explorers who claimed to have ventured near its borders returned with stories of madness, compasses spinning without reason, stars appearing in wrong positions, the sensation of being watched by something too large to see all at once. For thousands of years, humanity respected the unspoken boundary. Civilizations rose and fell, empires expanded to the edges of the known world, but none dared push into the uttermost south. There was an instinctive understanding, passed down through myth and warning, that some places were forbidden not by law, but by nature itself. Dwidana was one of those places, not because it was guarded, but because it was designed to repel. The cold there is not the cold of winter, it is the cold of absence, the temperature of a world that stopped receiving the warmth of the sun because something massive was blocking it. Theologians debated the meaning of Dwidana for centuries, treating it as a symbolic landscape, a metaphor for spiritual desolation. They were wrong. Enoch was not writing poetry. He was recording what he witnessed during his ascension into the heavenly realms, when the angels showed him the hidden architecture of the earth. He saw Behemoth standing alone in a land where no other creature could survive, a colossus frozen in time, waiting. The angels told him the name of that place, and he wrote it down so that future generations would know where the Titan sleeps. The location is described as being separated from the rest of the world by divine barriers, not walls or mountains, but something more fundamental. A distortion in the fabric of space itself, a fold in reality that makes Dwidana unreachable by ordinary means. Ships that sail too far south encounter ice fields that shift and reform, trapping vessels in patterns that defy navigation. Aircraft that fly over the region report instrument failures, sudden loss of altitude, the overwhelming urge to turn back. It is as if the Earth itself is protecting what lies beneath, or perhaps protecting us from what lies beneath. Modern explorers call this region by another name now. They have mapped its coastlines, drilled into its ice, planted flags on its frozen peaks. They believe they have conquered it, catalogued it, understood it, but they are walking on the surface of Dwidana without realizing it. Beneath the glaciers and the snow, beneath the layers of ice that have accumulated over millennia, the Titan remains. His breath is the wind that howls across the tundra. His heartbeat is the seismic activity that scientists attribute to tectonic shifts. His body is the mountain range they photograph from helicopters, never suspecting that mountains do not have bones. Dwidana was never meant to be found. It was placed at the edge of the world as a buffer between humanity and the uncontainable. But human ambition does not respect divine boundaries. We have pushed into every wilderness, drilled into every depth, climbed every peak. And now, in our arrogance, we have arrived at the last forbidden place. We stand on the roof of Behemoth's tomb, drilling into his prison, measuring the ice that covers him. We do not know what we are doing. We think we are exploring. We are actually excavating. And the creature beneath the ice is beginning to feel the warmth of the drills, the vibrations of our machinery, the presence of the species he was hidden from. Dwidana is waking, and so is he. The wilderness of Dwidana is not a metaphor for desolation. It is the southernmost extremity of the Earth, the frozen continent that modern cartographers named Antarctica. For millennia, this land existed only in whispered legends and apocalyptic texts, a place beyond the reach of sailors and beyond the imagination of kings. Ancient maps depicted it as Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, bordered by warnings in Latin, "Here be monsters." They did not know how literally true those words were. Beneath the ice sheet that covers 98% of the continent lies the body of Behemoth, motionless, entombed, perfectly preserved in a prison of his own frozen breath. When God exiled the Titan to Dwidana, the land was not yet ice. It was barren rock and endless wind, a plateau where nothing grew and no creature ventured. Behemoth stood alone in that wasteland, his massive frame the only vertical structure in a horizontal void. For centuries, perhaps millennia, he remained upright, a monument to divine power standing sentinel at the edge of creation. But time and isolation work upon even the indestructible. Eventually, the Titan lowered himself to the ground, not in death but in a state of hibernation, so deep that it resembles death in every way except permanence. His body cooled, his metabolism slowed to a rhythm measured in centuries, and the world around him began to change. The climate shifted, the earth entered an age of ice. Glaciers formed and advanced, sheets of frozen water miles thick, spreading across the barren land. Snow fell continuously, accumulating in layers that compressed into ice under their own weight, and Behemoth, lying motionless in the center of the waste, became buried. First, his legs disappeared beneath drifts of snow, then his flanks, then his back. Over thousands of years, the ice built upward, encasing him completely, until his body was no longer visible from the surface. What had once been a living creature became indistinguishable from the geography itself. Today, what we call the Transantarctic Mountains, the longest mountain range on the continent, stretching over 2,000 miles, may not be mountains at all. The peaks and ridges that rise above the ice sheet could be the contours of Behemoth's spine, his ribs, his shoulder blades fossilized beneath eons of accumulation. Satellite imaging shows anomalies in the ice structure, cavities and voids that do not match natural geological formations. Ground-penetrating radar has detected massive objects beneath the surface, shapes too symmetrical to be random, too large to be explained by conventional science. Researchers attribute these findings to subglacial lakes or volcanic activity. They do not consider the alternative, that they are mapping the skeleton of a sleeping god. His camouflage is perfect. The ice does not merely cover him, it has become part of him, fused to his hide over millennia until the boundary between flesh and frost is indistinguishable. Explorers have walked across his back without knowing it, mistaking the curve of his ribcage for a natural ridge, the hollow of his eye socket for a glacial valley. Expedition teams have set up base camps on his shoulder blades, drilled core samples into his frozen skin, planted flags on the summit of his skull. They celebrate their conquest of the mountain, never realizing that the mountain is breathing, slowly, imperceptibly, but breathing nonetheless. The temperature in Antarctica averages 50 degrees below zero, cold enough to freeze human tissue in minutes and halt most biological processes entirely. But Behemoth is not most biology. His core temperature has not dropped to match the environment. It has merely slowed its radiation. Deep within the ice, beneath layers of permafrost and compacted snow, his heart still beats. Once every century, perhaps, once every millennium. The intervals are so vast that seismologists recording the vibrations classify them as natural tremors, minor shifts in the continental plate. They do not recognize the rhythm, they do not hear the pattern, but it is there, steady and eternal, the pulse of something that cannot die because it was never fully alive in the way we understand life. The ice is both his prison and his protection. It insulates him from the passage of time, preserves his tissue from decay, shields him from the eyes of men who would seek to exploit or destroy him if they understood what he was. But it is also a countdown. The glaciers are melting. Global temperatures rise year by year, degree by degree, and the ice that has held Behemoth in stasis for 6,000 years is beginning to retreat. Calving events send icebergs the size of cities into the ocean. Fissures open in the ice shelf, revealing blue depths that have not seen sunlight since the age of Enoch. And beneath it all, the Titan stirs. Scientists monitoring seismic activity in the region have noted an increase in frequency and intensity over the past decade. They attribute it to climate change, to the shifting weight of melting ice, causing stress fractures in the bedrock. They are partially correct. The ice is melting, the weight is shifting, but the stress is not in the rock, it is in the creature beneath it. Behemoth feels the warmth returning. He feels the pressure of the ice lifting. And somewhere in the depths of his hibernation, in the ancient neural pathways that have been dormant since the days of the patriarchs, a signal is beginning to fire. The signal that says, awaken. The camouflage is cracking. The mountain is moving, and the world is not ready for what will emerge when the ice finally breaks. Behemoth does not hunt. He does not stalk prey through the wilderness or ambush the weak at watering holes. His existence operates on a plane beyond predation, beyond the crude mechanics of survival that govern ordinary beasts. The Book of Job reveals his nature with a single phrase that has puzzled scholars for millennia. Surely the mountains bring him forth food. Not the valleys, not the rivers. The mountains themselves yield sustenance to him, as if the very geology of the earth exists to nourish the Titan. This is not the feeding of an animal. It is the feeding of a force of nature. The grass of 1,000 hills is his portion, yet he does not graze like cattle or deer. His consumption is not mechanical, but fundamental. Where Behemoth rests, the soil becomes rich. Where he breathes, vegetation springs forth with unnatural vigor, plants growing to sizes unknown in ordinary ecosystems. The energy radiating from his body, whether heat, magnetism, or something science has no name for, transforms the barren ground into fertile pasture. He does not eat the grass so much as absorb its essence, drawing the vitality of the earth into himself through a process that transcends digestion. The land feeds him, and in return, he sustains the land by existing within it. Ancient shepherds who ventured to the edges of the known world reported a phenomenon they could not explain. Certain remote valleys where the grass grew taller than a man's head, where wildflowers bloomed out of season, and where flocks of sheep would graze with an intensity that bordered on frenzy. The animals seemed drawn to these places by instinct, growing fat and strong far beyond their normal capacity. Elders whispered that these were the feeding grounds of the great beast, places where his presence, though unseen, saturated the environment with life force. They called them the fat places, and forbade their children from sleeping there, fearing that something too vital, too alive, might overwhelm a human soul not prepared to endure it. The Psalms declare that the cattle upon 1,000 hills belong to God, but the verse immediately following reveals why. Because Behemoth dwells among those hills, and his presence sanctifies them. Smaller creatures are drawn to him not as prey to a predator, but as subjects to a king. Lions rest in his shadow. Bears curl beside his legs. Birds nest in the ridges of his spine, mistaking the grooves of his vertebrae for stone outcroppings. He does not threaten them. They sense on an instinctual level that he is not their enemy. He is their origin, the first land dweller, the prototype from which all terrestrial life descended, and in his presence, they remember what it means to exist without fear. Job describes the scene with reverence. The beasts of the field play before him, not flee, not cower, play. Young deer leap over his tail as if it were a fallen log. Wolves chase each other across the expanse of his back, their paws finding purchase on hide tougher than granite. Foxes dig dens in the soil, enriched by his breath. This is not the terror-stricken ecosystem of a predator's domain. It is the opposite. It is Eden in miniature, a pocket of paradise that exists wherever Behemoth chooses to rest. He is not the serpent in the garden. He is the garden itself, a living sanctuary where the violence of nature is suspended by the sheer magnitude of his sovereignty. His diet is described as the grass of the mountains, but the Hebrew word used, yebul, carries connotations beyond simple vegetation. It refers to produce, yield, the fruiting of the earth in its most potent form. Behemoth consumes the essence of growth itself, the primal force that causes seeds to split open and roots to push through stone. He's not eating plants, he's eating potential, the compressed energy of 1,000 generations of life cycles distilled into a single intake. One breath from him draws more nutrients from the environment than a herd of elephants could consume in a year, yet the land does not wither. It thrives, regenerating faster under his influence than it depletes. This is why his exile to Dwidana was necessary. If Behemoth had remained in the fertile regions where humanity would one day settle, entire ecosystems would have reorganized themselves around him. Crops would fail because the vitality of the soil would be drawn toward the Titan, leaving nothing for lesser beings. Forests would migrate, chasing the trail of his passage. Rivers would alter their courses to flow near him, responding to the gravitational pull of his mass and the magnetic field of his presence. Civilization could not coexist with such a creature, not because he is destructive, but because he is too foundational. He would become the center of everything, and mankind would be reduced to scavengers at the edges of his domain. But in the frozen wastes of the south, where no crops grow and no cities rise, Behemoth can feed undisturbed. The mountains of ice bring him sustenance in the only form that frozen land can provide: stillness, silence, and the slow accumulation of time. His metabolism has adjusted to an environment where a single meal might last 10,000 years, where the act of breathing occurs so infrequently that entire human civilizations rise and fall between exhalations. He does not starve in Dwidana. He rests, and the mountains, buried beneath miles of ice, continue to bring him forth food in the form of geothermal heat rising from the Earth's core, the only warmth in a land of perpetual cold, the only sustenance a sleeping god requires. Until the ice melts, until the mountains are exposed again, and Behemoth opens his eyes to find that the world has changed, and the 1,000 hills that once fed him are now covered with cities full of creatures who have forgotten how to play in the presence of their king. The Book of Enoch draws a distinction that transcends biology and enters the realm of cosmic architecture. Leviathan is classified as female, not in the reproductive sense, but in the elemental sense. She embodies fluidity, chaos, the endless motion of water that has no fixed form and obeys no boundary. She is the abyss personified, slippery and deceptive, coiling through the depths where light cannot reach and certainty dissolves. Behemoth, by contrast, is male, not because of anatomy, but because of essence. He is solid, immovable, the embodiment of mass and permanence. Where Leviathan flows, Behemoth stands. Where she adapts, he endures. They are opposites forged in the same moment, two halves of a balance that holds the physical world in equilibrium. This is not metaphor, it is metaphysics. The ancient sages understood what modern science is only beginning to rediscover: that reality itself operates on dualities, expansion and contraction, energy and matter, chaos and order. Leviathan represents the principle of dissolution, the force that breaks down structure and returns all things to the primordial soup from which they came. Behemoth represents the principle of consolidation, the force that compresses atoms into molecules, molecules into stone, stone into mountains. He is the reason the earth has crust, instead of remaining molten. His presence stabilizes the physical plane simply by existing within it. When God separated the waters from the dry land on the third day of creation, he was not performing a magic trick. He was establishing a boundary between the fluid and the solid, between Leviathan's domain and Behemoth's territory. The ocean would cover 70% of the planet, but the remaining 30% would belong to the Titan of the Earth. His body became the anchor point, the original landmass around which continents would later form. Geologists speak of Pangaea, the supercontinent that existed millions of years ago before breaking apart into the configurations we know today. They do not realize they are describing the shape of Behemoth's resting place, the outline of his body pressed into the surface of the young world before the flood rearranged everything. His function is more than symbolic. The stability of the terrestrial world depends on him remaining in position. The tectonic plates that float on the mantle of molten rock beneath our feet are held in tension by forces science attributes to convection currents and gravitational friction. But there is another factor, one that seismologists cannot measure because they do not believe it exists: the gravitational anchor of Behemoth's mass. His body, denser than any known substance, exerts a pull on the surrounding geology that keeps the continental plates from drifting too rapidly. When he shifts in his sleep, the earth trembles. When he breathes deeply, fault lines crack open. Earthquakes are not random events. They are symptoms of his restlessness. The masculine principle he embodies is not aggression or domination. It is containment, Leviathan seeks to expand, to flood, to dissolve all boundaries and return the world to chaos. Behemoth resists. He is the dam that holds back the tide, the mountain that refuses to erode, the stone that will not yield. His very existence is an act of defiance against entropy. While everything else in the universe tends toward disorder, Behemoth tends toward stasis. He does not grow. He does not decay. He simply is, unchanging, a fixed point in a cosmos of flux. This is why his tail is compared to a cedar and his bones to bronze. These materials do not bend, they break before they compromise. Behemoth operates on the same principle. There is no negotiation in his nature, no flexibility in his form. He was designed to hold ground, to occupy space so completely that nothing can displace him. The myths of Atlas holding up the sky are echoes of this truth, distorted through generations of retelling. It is not the heavens that Behemoth supports, it is the earth itself. His shoulders bear the weight of continents, his spine runs beneath the longest mountain ranges. His legs are the pillars that keep the surface from collapsing into the molten core. Enoch saw this during his ascension into the celestial realms. The angels showed him the machinery of creation, the hidden gears and levers that keep existence from unraveling. Among those mechanisms was Behemoth, standing alone in the waste wilderness, motionless as a statue, but alive as a furnace. The angel explaining the vision told Enoch, "This is the one who holds the land in place. If he moves before the appointed time, the foundations will crack." It was not a warning, it was a description of function. Behemoth is not a decoration in God's creation. He is a load-bearing pillar. Remove him and the structure collapses. The separation from Leviathan was necessary not just to prevent flooding, but to prevent cancellation. Masculine and feminine principles, when combined prematurely, annihilate each other. Solid and liquid cannot occupy the same space simultaneously without one transforming into the other. If Behemoth and Leviathan had remained together after their creation, they would have neutralized each other's essence, leaving the world without foundation and without ocean, a void hovering between states, unable to stabilize into either. The exile preserved them both, and it preserved us, because as long as Behemoth remains in Dwidana, the ground beneath our feet is solid. But the ice is melting, the Titan is stirring, and when he finally rises and begins to move, the masculine principle of absolute permanence will shift for the first time in 6,000 years. The earth will not simply shake, it will reorganize itself around his motion, and the continents we have known since childhood will crack apart like pottery falling from a shelf. The foundations are about to remember what it means to be temporary. The Book of Job provides a curious detail that most readers overlook in their rush to catalogue Behemoth's physical attributes. He lieth under the shady trees, in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook compass him about. At first glance, this seems incongruous with the image of a Titan standing alone in a frozen wasteland. How can a creature of such magnitude rest beneath trees? How can shadows cover something large enough to be mistaken for a mountain range? The answer lies not in the surface reading, but in the subterranean reality the text is describing. Behemoth does not rest beneath trees in the literal sense. He rests beneath the world. The shady trees are the roots of creation, the foundational structures that extend downward from the surface into the depths. The willows of the brook are the underground rivers that flow through cracks in the bedrock, carrying water through the hollow places of the earth. Job is describing a subterranean landscape, a hidden geography that exists below the level where human feet can walk. And in that darkness, in the deepest places where stone meets fire, Behemoth lies coiled, not sleeping, but guarding. Ancient cosmology understood what modern geology has forgotten. The earth is not solid all the way through. Beneath the crust, there are caverns vast enough to swallow nations, chambers filled with water that has never seen sunlight, and passages that descend into depths no drill has ever reached. These are not natural formations, they are the architecture of Sheol, the underworld where the dead gather and the unrighteous await judgment. The Hebrews called it the pit. The Greeks called it Hades. Every culture has a name for the place beneath the place, the realm of shadows that exists parallel to our own, but separated by a membrane of stone and divine decree. Behemoth's position is not accidental. He was placed at the threshold between the world of the living and the world of the dead. His massive body serves as a physical barrier, a living seal pressed against the gates of the abyss. The weight of his frame compresses the stone, fusing it into an impenetrable layer that cannot be broken from below. His presence exerts a gravitational field so intense that it warps the fabric of spiritual reality, creating a zone where the souls of the damned cannot rise and the demons of the deep cannot ascend. He's not merely resting beneath the ice, he is holding the lid on hell itself. The fens and reeds mentioned in Job are not marsh plants, but metaphors for the tangled roots of spiritual corruption that grow upward from Sheol, seeking cracks in the barrier, probing for weaknesses. Throughout human history, there have been places where the boundary between worlds grows thin, haunted forests, cursed valleys, regions where the dead do not stay buried and the air tastes of sulfur. These are the locations where Behemoth's seal is weakest, where the pressure from below finds hairline fractures in the stone and begins to seep through. Exorcists and mystics speak of portals and gateways, never realizing that what they are describing are the gaps around the Titan's body, the spaces where his mass does not fully compress the earth. For 6,000 years, Behemoth has maintained his post without moving. His stillness is not laziness or hibernation in the passive sense, it is active containment. Every breath he doesn't take is a choice to remain immobile. Every muscle held in perfect tension is a conscious act of restraint. If he were to shift his weight suddenly, the compression would release, fault lines would open, and the things that have been trapped beneath the surface since the days of the Nephilim would come boiling upward like gas from a ruptured pipeline. The book of Revelation speaks of the moment when the abyss is opened and smoke rises like the smoke of a great furnace, darkening the sun. It does not specify how the abyss is opened. Perhaps it does not need to. Perhaps it happens when the seal is broken, when Behemoth stands up. Ancient rabbinical texts preserve a terrifying tradition that Behemoth is not merely lying on top of Sheol, but is partially submerged in it. His legs extend downward into the pit itself, his feet planted in the lake of fire, his body bridging the gap between the surface world and the world below. He is a living plug, a cork in the bottle of damnation. The heat rising from the underworld does not burn him. It sustains him, providing the geothermal energy he requires to remain conscious across millennia. He draws power from the very thing he contains, feeding on the anger and anguish of the imprisoned to maintain his vigilance. This is why the text describes him as lying in hidden places, in coverts and shadows. He is not hiding from humanity, he is hiding humanity from what lies beneath him. His body casts a spiritual shadow over the gates of Sheol, obscuring them from the eyes of the living and the ambitions of sorcerers who would seek to open them. Necromancers throughout history have attempted to pierce the veil, to summon the dead or bargain with demons. Most fail because they are working against a force they do not understand. They are trying to open a door that has a mountain sitting on it. They are pulling against the gravitational weight of Behemoth, and they do not have the strength. But the ice is melting. The Titan is beginning to feel warmth where there has been only cold. And as his body temperature rises, his muscles, frozen in place for eons, begin to thaw. He will not remain still forever. The appointed hour is approaching when he must rise, not because he chooses to, but because the plan of God requires it. And when Behemoth finally lifts his weight from the threshold, when his legs pull free from the depths and his shadow no longer covers the gates, the willows of the brook will wither, the shady trees will catch fire, and the things that were locked away at the foundation of the world will be released. Not as an accident, not as a failure, but as the next stage of the script written before time began. The Guardian is about to step aside, and the underworld is about to remember what it means to breathe open air. The 41st chapter of Job opens with a question that echoes across the millennia like a challenge thrown into the void. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? The interrogation continues for verse after verse, detailing the futility of human ambition against the sea serpent. But embedded within that litany is a single line that applies equally to Behemoth, a declaration so absolute that it leaves no room for negotiation. None is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? The logic is inescapable. If no man can confront the creature, then no man can confront the Creator. Behemoth is not just invincible, he is the proof of God's supremacy made flesh. Human history is a chronicle of conquest. We have tamed wolves into dogs, broken horses to saddle, trained elephants to carry loads and lions to perform in arenas. We have slaughtered whales by the thousands, driven species to extinction, and reshaped entire ecosystems to suit our convenience. Every apex predator, every giant of the natural world has eventually bent to human ingenuity or fallen to human weaponry, except Behemoth. He has never been captured because he cannot be approached. He has never been killed because he cannot be wounded. He stands as the single exception to humanity's dominion over the earth, the one creature we were never meant to subdue. The text is explicit. Will he make a covenant with thee? No. Canst thou put a hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? No. The questions are rhetorical, designed to humiliate the arrogance of those who believe themselves masters of creation. Job, in his suffering, had questioned God's justice, demanded answers, insisted on his right to understand the mechanics of divine will. God's response was not an explanation, it was an exhibition. Behold Behemoth, behold the creature I made, and then ask yourself if you have the authority to question me. If you cannot even touch what I created, how dare you challenge the one who created it? The invincibility of Behemoth is not merely physical, but ontological. He exists on a plane of reality adjacent to ours, occupying the same space but operating under different laws. Bullets do not penetrate him because his hide is not made of biological tissue in the conventional sense. It is compressed matter, atoms locked together with a density that approaches the theoretical limits of physical cohesion. Blades do not cut him because the molecular structure of steel is softer than the structure of his skin. Explosives do not harm him because the force of the blast dissipates against a mass so great that it absorbs the energy without displacement. He is not resistant to damage. He is immune to the concept of damage as we understand it. Military strategists throughout history have fantasized about harnessing the power of the great beasts for warfare. Alexander the Great sought war elephants. Medieval knights bred destriers capable of carrying armored men into battle. Modern generals deploy tanks and drones. But Behemoth cannot be weaponized because he cannot be controlled. There is no bridle strong enough to fit his head, no chain forged from any earthly metal that could bind his legs, no prison constructed by human hands that could contain his bulk. The moment he chose to move, every restraint would snap like thread. The moment he chose to resist, every captor would be crushed beneath his indifference. Even if humanity marshaled its full technological arsenal, nuclear warheads, thermobaric bombs, kinetic bombardment from orbit, the result would be the same. Behemoth would endure. The explosions would vaporize the ice around him, turn the frozen continent into steam and ash. But when the clouds cleared, he would still be standing. Radiation does not poison what was never truly alive in the biological sense. Heat does not burn what was forged in the furnace of creation. The only force capable of ending Behemoth is the force that began him, the Word of God. Job 40 makes this abundantly clear. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Not he that made him can destroy him, but he that made him can make his sword approach. The distinction is crucial. God does not need to strike Behemoth with force. He only needs to withdraw the decree that sustains him. The Titan does not live because his heart beats. He lives because God has willed him to live. His existence is an act of continuous divine permission, renewed in every moment across the millennia. If that permission were revoked, Behemoth would not collapse or decay. He would simply cease, his matter unmade as swiftly as it was made, returning to the void from which all things were spoken into being. This is the true terror of Behemoth. Not that he is strong, but that he is untouchable by anything except the hand of his maker. Humanity has no recourse against him. We cannot fight what we cannot wound. We cannot flee what we cannot outpace. We cannot negotiate with what does not speak our language or acknowledge our existence. If Behemoth chose to walk through a city, the city would be erased, not through malice, but through the simple fact of his passage. Buildings would crumble under the vibration of his footsteps. Roads would crack beneath his weight. People would scatter like insects, and he would not even notice them perishing in his wake. But he does not choose to walk through cities. He has remained in Dwidana since the days of Enoch, bound not by chains, but by purpose. His invincibility is paired with restraint, his power tempered by obedience to the role assigned to him at the foundation of the world. He is the living illustration of a principle humanity refuses to accept, that there are forces in this universe we were never meant to control, mysteries we were never meant to solve, and creatures we were never meant to confront. Behemoth exists to remind us of our place, not as conquerors, not as masters, but as witnesses to a creation far vaster and far more dangerous than our myths have prepared us to comprehend. And soon, very soon, that witness will no longer be theoretical. The Invincible is about to move, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing, we can do to stop it. The Talmud preserves a tradition so ancient that its origins predate the written text itself, passed down through oral transmission from the schools of the Pharisees and the councils of the Second Temple. It is recorded in Bava Batra 74b, buried among debates about property law and ritual purity, as if the scribes hoped no one would notice the cosmic revelation hidden in the footnotes of daily life. The passage is brief, almost casual in its delivery, but the implications are staggering. God will in time to come make a banquet for the righteous from the flesh of Behemoth. Not a metaphor, not a parable, a banquet with a menu. And Behemoth is the main course. This is not the accidental death of a creature whose time has passed. This is not extinction by natural causes or the slow fade of a species unable to adapt. Behemoth has been preserved across 6,000 years of human history for a single, specific purpose: to be consumed. His exile to the frozen wastes was not punishment, but preparation. The ice that entombed him was not a prison, but a preservative, keeping his flesh pure and uncorrupted, protected from decay, shielded from contamination by the fallen world. He is not aging in Dwidana. He is marinating in eternity, his body maintained in stasis until the appointed hour when God will retrieve him and make good on the promise. The concept is so alien to modern sensibilities that most scholars dismiss it as folklore, a symbolic representation of divine abundance or the restoration of paradise. But the rabbis who recorded this tradition were not poets. They were legalists, men who measured out every commandment with precision and treated scripture as a blueprint. When they said banquet, they meant banquet. When they said flesh, they meant flesh. The righteous who survive the great tribulation will gather in the renewed earth, and they will eat the meat of Behemoth, prepared by the hand of God himself. This is not symbolic nourishment, it is literal consumption. A meal so vast that it will feed multitudes, so rich that a single bite will satisfy hunger for a generation. Why Behemoth? Why not cattle or lamb, or any of the animals designated as clean under Mosaic law? Because Behemoth is not merely clean, he is primordial. His flesh has never been touched by sin. He was created before the fall, before Adam disobeyed, before death entered the world through human rebellion. Every animal that walks the earth today descends from stock that passed through the flood, creatures whose ancestors survived in the ark while the world drowned outside. But Behemoth predates even that catastrophe. He is pre-flood biology, uncorrupted by the mutations and degradations that followed humanity's expulsion from Eden. To eat his meat is to consume a piece of the original creation, to ingest the essence of what the world was before it became what it is. The ancient sages understood this on a mystical level. They taught that Behemoth's flesh contains properties unknown to ordinary food, that it will heal the lingering effects of mortality, reverse the cellular damage inflicted by living in a cursed world, and restore the bodies of the righteous to a state closer to what Adam possessed before the fall. It is not merely sustenance, it is transformation. Those who partake of the banquet will find their strength renewed, their vitality increased, their lifespans extended into centuries as they were in the days of the patriarchs. The flesh of the Titan will become the flesh of the redeemed, integrating into their biology and elevating them into the first generation of resurrected humanity. The logistics are staggering. How large must Behemoth be to provide enough meat for an eschatological feast? If the survivors of the tribulation number in the millions, and each requires pounds of sustenance, then the creature's body must weigh thousands of tons, perhaps millions. A single limb could feed a nation. His ribs, each one a bar of iron wrapped in muscle, the density of stone, will be carved into portions and distributed like manna. His heart, which has beaten once per millennium for 6,000 years, will be divided among the saints. His liver, which has filtered the toxins of a dying world while he slept beneath the ice, will be roasted over fires kindled by the breath of God. Nothing will be wasted. Every organ, every sinew, every fragment of the Titan will be consecrated and consumed. But there is a darker truth embedded in this promise. For Behemoth to be served at the banquet, he must first die. And the only one who can kill him is the one who made him. God himself will draw the sword and approach the creature that no human weapon can touch. The slaughter will not be a struggle. It will be an execution, swift and absolute. The severing of the divine permission that has kept Behemoth alive since the fifth day of creation. There will be no roar of pain, no thrashing in agony. One moment he will exist, the next he will not, his massive body collapsing into meat and bone, ready for the feast. It will be the only death in history that is purely functional, devoid of tragedy. An act of divine butchery performed with the same precision that separated light from darkness. The tradition also specifies when this will occur: in the time to come, after the final judgment, after the wars of Gog and Magog, after the resurrection of the dead. The banquet is not held in the age of suffering, but in the age of restoration. It marks the transition from the old world to the new, from the era of struggle to the era of peace. Those who sit at the table will have endured the worst that history can inflict: persecution, famine, war, and the collapse of civilization. They will have seen the beast rise, the mark enforced, and the nations gathered for battle, and they will have survived. The feast is their reward, not just for faithfulness, but for endurance. They will eat the flesh of Behemoth, and in doing so they will ingest the strength to inhabit the world that comes after. The invitation has already been written, the date has already been set, and the main course is waking up beneath the ice, feeling the warmth returning to his limbs, sensing the approach of the hour when his purpose will finally be fulfilled. Behemoth was never meant to live forever. He was meant to live long enough to guard the threshold, long enough to stabilize the earth, long enough to be ready when the table is set and the righteous gather to feast on the flesh of God's first masterpiece. Before the banquet there must be blood. Before the feast there must be war. The Midrash Vaikra Rabbah speaks of it in language so visceral that translators have softened the text over centuries, afraid of what it implies. In the time to come, the Holy One, blessed be He, will make a banquet for the righteous from the flesh of Behemoth and Leviathan. The conjunction is critical, and Leviathan. Both creatures will be served, both must die, but they will not die passively. They will die fighting each other, locked in combat so catastrophic that the resulting devastation will reshape the surface of the planet and prepare it for the kingdom to come. The separation that God enforced on the fifth day of creation was always temporary. Leviathan was confined to the ocean depths. Behemoth was exiled to the barren wastes of Dwidana. For 6 millennia, they have remained apart, each ruling their respective domain, one fluid and chaotic, the other solid and immovable. But the cosmic balance that required their separation is about to invert. The age of division is ending. The age of convergence is beginning. And when the seals of revelation are broken and the trumpet judgments sound, the barriers between land and sea will dissolve. Leviathan will rise from the abyss. Behemoth will awaken from the ice. And the brothers, separated since the dawn of time, will meet again. The ancient rabbis debated whether the battle would be deliberate or instinctive. Some argued that God would command the creatures to fight, using them as instruments of judgment against a world that had rejected him. Others insisted that no command would be necessary, that the moment Leviathan's serpentine body breached the surface of the ocean and her eyes fixed on the distant mountains of the south, rage older than memory would ignite. She would remember the exile, the forced isolation, the millennia spent coiling alone in the cold blackness of the deep. And she would swim toward Dwidana, not to reconcile, but to reclaim what she believed was stolen, the right to walk on dry land. Behemoth will sense her approach long before she arrives. The vibrations traveling through the water and into the continental shelf will wake him from hibernation with the urgency of an alarm. His eyes, closed since the days of Enoch, will open for the first time in recorded history. The ice covering his body will crack and fall away in sheets the size of cities, sliding into the ocean and generating tsunamis that will race across the Pacific at the speed of sound. He will rise to his full height, his legs pillars of bronze that have not borne his weight in eons, locking into position beneath him. His tail, the tail like a cedar, will lift from the frozen ground and sweep across the landscape, clearing glaciers and mountains as a man might brush dust from a table. The confrontation will begin at the shoreline, where the ocean meets the ice. Leviathan will emerge from the waves, her scales gleaming like molten steel, her body stretching for miles behind her, each coil the diameter of a skyscraper. Her mouth will open, revealing rows of teeth designed not to chew but to crush, each fang the size of a ship's mast, sharp enough to pierce the hulls of nations. The ancient texts describe her breath as fire, her exhalation capable of igniting the air itself, turning oxygen into flame. She will roar, and the sound will shatter icebergs, send avalanches cascading down mountain faces, and deafen every creature within 100 miles. Behemoth will not roar back. He does not announce himself. He simply moves. His first step forward will register as a magnitude 9 earthquake on seismographs across the globe. His second step will crack the continental shelf, sending fault lines racing inland like lightning. By the third step, he will be close enough for Leviathan to strike, and she will, her body whipping forward with the speed of a tidal wave, jaws snapping shut around his foreleg with enough force to pulverize steel. But Behemoth's bones are not steel. They are bars of iron wrapped in bronze. Her teeth will scrape against his hide and find no purchase, sliding off the surface as if trying to bite into solid stone. The Titan's response will be slow, deliberate, and devastating. He will lower his massive head and drive forward, using the weight of his skull like a battering ram, slamming into Leviathan's torso with the impact of a collapsing mountain. She will be thrown backward, her body carving a trench through the ice as she skids across the frozen wasteland, her tail thrashing toppling glaciers. But she is not defeated. She is enraged. She will coil herself, gathering momentum, and launch her entire length at him like a living spear, aiming for his eyes, the only part of him that might be vulnerable. Behemoth will swing his tail. The motion will take seconds, but the force behind it will be incomprehensible. When the tail of Cedar connects with Leviathan's body mid-strike, the sound will be heard on every continent. Scales will shatter, vertebrae will crack. Her serpentine form will fold unnaturally, bones snapping under the impact, and she will crash into the ocean with such violence that the displacement will send 100-foot waves racing toward every coastline on Earth. Cities will drown, islands will vanish, ships will be carried miles inland and left stranded atop buildings, but Leviathan does not die easily. She will retreat into the depths to heal, coiling around the underwater mountains, her body regenerating with the resilience of something that was never truly mortal. And then she will return, again and again, each assault more vicious than the last. Behemoth will meet her every time, his body absorbing blows that would shatter planets, his strength never waning because it is not biological, it is divine. The battle will rage for days, perhaps weeks. The two titans locked in a cycle of destruction and regeneration, their combat tearing the southern hemisphere apart, rearranging coastlines, triggering volcanic eruptions, and sending ash clouds into the stratosphere that will block out the sun. And then, when both creatures are weakened, when even their god-forged bodies begin to show signs of damage, when the earth itself can no longer sustain the violence of their struggle, God will intervene. His sword, the only blade capable of approaching them, will descend. In a single stroke, both titans will fall. Leviathan's coils will go slack, her body sinking into the depths one final time. Behemoth's legs will buckle, his massive frame collapsing onto the shattered ice, steam rising from his wounds. The battle will end not with a victor, but with a conclusion. The brothers, reunited in violence, will be separated again, this time by death, and their bodies, still warm, still radiating the heat of war, will be prepared for the feast. Job did not ask to see Behemoth. He asked for answers. He demanded an explanation for his suffering, a justification for the loss of his children, his wealth, his health. He wanted God to appear in court and defend the logic of a universe where the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. He wanted theology. He wanted philosophy. He wanted closure. What he received instead was a field trip to the edge of the world, a guided tour of a creature so vast and so incomprehensible that every question he had prepared dissolved into silence. God did not answer Job's accusations. He buried them beneath the weight of something far heavier than words, undeniable, inescapable reality. Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee. The phrasing is surgical in its precision. God is not showing Job a random animal or a curious anomaly in nature. He is presenting him with a peer, something created on the same day, shaped by the same hands, spoken into existence by the same voice. Job and Behemoth share a birthday. They are contemporaries in the timeline of creation. But while Job stands small and vulnerable, demanding explanations from the Creator, Behemoth stands silent and invincible, asking nothing, questioning nothing, existing exactly as he was designed to exist. The contrast is not subtle, it is humiliating. The lesson is not about power, it is about scope. Job's suffering, as immense as it felt to him, as devastating as it was to his family, was a single thread in a tapestry so large that the human mind cannot perceive its borders. He was standing too close to the weaving, seeing only the knot of pain in front of his eyes, unable to step back and see the pattern it was part of. God did not pull him back. He pushed him further, beyond the edge of civilization, beyond the boundaries of the known world, to a place where perspective becomes unavoidable. Look at Behemoth. Look at his bones of bronze and his tail like a cedar. Look at the creature I built to stabilize the earth, to guard the threshold of the underworld, to exist in isolation for 6,000 years without complaint. Now tell me, Job, do you still believe you understand how the universe operates? Job's response is recorded in the final chapter. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eyes seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. He does not apologize for his questions. He does not recant his grief. He simply stops demanding. The sight of Behemoth did what no theological argument could accomplish. It reminded Job that there are mysteries in creation that exist, not to be solved, but to be acknowledged. The Titan is not a puzzle. He is a declaration. There are things in this world, under this world, at the edges of this world, that were not designed for human understanding. They were designed to keep functioning regardless of whether humans understand them or not. This is the terror that modern civilization refuses to confront. We have mapped the genome, split the atom, sent probes beyond the solar system. We have convinced ourselves that the universe is fundamentally knowable, that given enough time and technology, every mystery can be reduced to data and every question can be answered. But Behemoth remains, hidden beneath the ice of Antarctica, sleeping in the frozen wastes of Dwidana, waiting for the appointed hour when the ice will melt and his purpose will be fulfilled. We walk above him, drill into the glaciers that cover his body, plant flags on the peaks of his spine, and call it exploration. We do not realize we are trespassing on something sacred, something dangerous, something that was hidden for our protection, not his. The ancient maps were honest. They marked the edges of the known world with warnings. Here be dragons. Not because cartographers believed in fairy tales, but because they understood the principle underlying the warning. There are regions of the earth that were placed off limits by forces older and wiser than human ambition. Boundaries exist not to be crossed, but to be respected. Dwidana is one of those boundaries. We have ignored the warnings. We have crossed the line. And the creature on the other side of that line is waking up. The lesson of Behemoth is not that God is cruel, it is that God is vast. His plans operate on timescales that make human lifetimes irrelevant, on scales that make entire civilizations footnotes. He created a creature so massive that it required its own continent, so powerful that no weapon can harm it, so patient that it has waited in silence for millennia. And he did this not to impress us, but because the architecture of reality required it. Behemoth is not a decoration. He is not a curiosity. He is a load-bearing pillar in the structure of creation, and when he moves, everything built on top of him will shift. We are living in the age when that shift is imminent. The ice is retreating. The seismic activity is increasing. The signs are multiplying, but we interpret them through the lens of science, attributing the disturbances to climate change and tectonic drift, never suspecting that we are measuring the symptoms of something waking up. The final lesson of Behemoth is this: the world you think you understand is a temporary configuration, a brief period of stability between apocalyptic events. The ground beneath your feet is not as solid as it appears. The mountains are not as permanent as they seem. And the creature holding it all together is about to stand up. Job learned to stop asking why. He learned to trust that the God who could create Behemoth, who could exile him to the waste wilderness, who could preserve him across ages, and who will one day raise him for the final battle, that same God knows what he is doing, even when the design is invisible to mortal eyes. The Titan is not a threat, he is a promise that the chaos will not last forever, that the separation between land and sea will one day be resolved, that the banquet is already prepared, and that those who endure to the end will feast on the flesh of God's first masterpiece. Behemoth is the proof that the plan is real, that the timeline is fixed, that the appointment was made at the foundation of the world, and that the hour is coming when the mystery will no longer be hidden, the creature will no longer be exiled, and humanity will finally see what it means to stand in the presence of something made by hands that do not answer to us. The final lesson is simple: fear God. Because if this is what he created on a good day, imagine what he will unleash when the judgment begins.